Welcome to Washington Journal. It's Saturday, November 11th, Veterans Day. You're looking at a picture of the statue at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. At 10:55 this morning, C-SPAN will go live to the Arlington National Cemetery, where President Clinton will participate in the wreath-laying ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknowns. Meanwhile, it's 4 days after Election Day, and we still don't know, and probably won't know for several more days at least, who the next president will be. Here to talk about that and the elections that we do know the winners of in the House and the Senate is Sean Scully. He's national reporter for the Washington Times. He'll be going through the morning papers and taking your calls. As always, there are 3 lines for you to call in on, all area code 202. Bush voters can call in at 624-1111. Gore voters at 624-1115. All others, 737-6734. In about 45 minutes, we'll be joined briefly over the telephone by Dane Waters. He's president of the Initiative and Referendum Institute. He'll be talking about some of the ballot initiatives that passed or failed on Tuesday. There were 204 of them altogether, everything from same-sex marriage and medical marijuana to tax rollbacks and universal health care. In our second and final hour this morning, we'll be joined by 2 people you'd probably never have heard of 4 years ago, but who've suddenly become pivotal to the presidential election. They're members of the Electoral College. Greg Pecoraro, a Democrat, is an elector from Maryland. Gloria Taylor Fisher, a Republican, is an elector from Virginia. They'll be talking about how they got their jobs, how the Electoral College works, and how they'll be voting on December 18th. Sean Scully, good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Let me just read you the latest news. This happened overnight at about 6 minutes before 1 o'clock in the morning. Out of Albuquerque, the Associated Press reported that George W. Bush has taken a 17-vote lead over Al Gore in the New Mexico vote count. For a long time, it looked like Vice President Al Gore was leading there. However, a few minutes later, the Associated Press also reported that as many as 370 additional special absentee ballots remain to be counted next week in New Mexico. Earlier in the evening, at about 7:30, an urgent from the Associated Press from Salem, Oregon, Vice President Al Gore narrowly defeated George W. Bush for Oregon's 7 electoral votes in a bittersweet victory 3 days after the election. The margin is so close that a recount cannot be precluded. Apparently, with about 99% of the votes counted as of Friday afternoon, Gore was leading by 5,973 votes. A recount would be required by state law if the margin between Bush and Gore is less than 1/5 of 1%, or about 2,800 votes. Now, altogether, I think New Mexico, 5 electoral votes, Oregon, 7 electoral votes. Does this change anything?
Not substantially. Florida still holds the key, and it proves that this thing is going to go on forever. But other than that, it doesn't, in electoral college sense, it doesn't change much at all.
Well, let me show you one other story, and this is on the front page of this morning's Washington Post. This is about the hand count that they're talking about down, and then I'll get your reaction to that. This is by Dan Keating and George Lardner, Jr. in the Washington Post this morning. Hand count could lift Gore total. Democrats focus on undervotes. And in the middle of the story, it says, in the 4 counties in which the hand recount is being sought, all heavily Democratic areas, nearly 80,000 ballots were not counted in the presidential tally. They were discarded either because they had overvotes, in which more than one candidate was marked, or undervotes, where no marking was detected by counting machines. Since the overvote has at least 2 punch holes detected by counting machines, it would be hard for the canvassing board to say that a voter's intent can be discerned. Therefore, hand count's unlikely to change those results. However, ballots with undervotes, no choice for presidential candidate, present a more promising target for Democrats. Of the counties in which Democrats have requested a full or partial hand count, there were about 26,000 undervotes. If historical trends on hand recounts hold true in this situation, a full review of the votes in the 4, and let me just go to the next, the jump here in the Post story this morning. It's right up here. There it is. The counties could produce a net gain of about 500 or more votes for Vice President Gore. Can you put us in the picture a little bit on this hand recount? This is, of course, if I hadn't mentioned it, it's in Florida, of course, that they're hand recounting.
The interesting thing is Florida uses machine reader ballots, and apparently, according to election officials down there, they're notoriously unreliable. You can run these things through the machines multiple times and get different results. And so really the only practical way to go through it and find out exactly who voted how is to go through and strike each ballot and count each ballot. Unfortunately, it's an immensely complicated and time-consuming process. The Bush people apparently are considering going to court to challenge it. I don't know what their basis is, and it looks like they're undecided. The New York Times said they're considering it. One of the editions of the Post I saw this morning said that they have decided to do it. That, I guess, could sort of embolden the Democrats to then say, we're going to go to court as well if we're both playing this game. Ultimately, though, it seems if what people say is true about the machine reader ballots, that may be the only answer.
You know, there was a term I found when I was looking through a glossary of election terms, a phrase I'd never heard before, hanging Chad. Have you heard of this? You know,
No.
Apparently that's when these machine reader ballots you're talking about are punched, but the little piece of cardboard or paper or whatever doesn't quite come out of the hole. And anyway, I guess we're going to learn stuff like that as we go along.
We're all learning amazing arcana about the, about the election system.
Here's one more story before we go to the phones, and this is from your newspaper, the Washington Times. Here it is on page 1. Donald Lambro writes, some top Democrats are urging Vice President Al Gore to accept the results of Florida's ongoing recount of its presidential vote, warning that a long legal battle would set a dangerous precedent. Senator Robert G. Torricelli of New Jersey, the Senate Democratic Campaign Committee chairman, said legal action could endanger the country's stability, warning that such action by Mr. Gore would put the country on a downward spiral. Leon Panetta, President Clinton's former White House chief of staff, urged Mr. Gore to accept Florida's recount as the final judgment for the sake of the country.
I think this is one of the most interesting aspects. I think people in both parties are very nervous about about this thing dragging on, in part, I think, because of the economy. I mean, the good economy has been based in large part on consumer confidence. And if people get angry and people get nervous, who knows what happens going into the Christmas season. And I think nobody wants to have, first, a presidency that's challenged or illegitimate, and second, no one wants to have their president in charge of a tanking economy.
Our first call for Sean Scully of the Washington Times is from a Bush supporter in St. Petersburg, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm concerned about the way this is all going. From pure mechanical standpoint, the vote is should be either conceded or declared when the last vote is in. The last ballot vote is in already and has been counted and recounted, which is what the Bush people are getting at. The absentee ballots are still waiting to come in. In this particular case, because there's so many ballots standing, and the difference between the two candidates is so close, the absentee ballot is going to make a difference, or potentially could make a difference. And we all need to be patient and, give it time to let that happen. But in the meantime, what I'm concerned is I'm seeing an attempt to delegitimize the Bush administration before it even has a chance to take office.
Okay, caller, thanks. Let's get a response.
Both sides are incredibly worried about that, and right at the moment the pressure is greater on the Gore side, just because the vote appears to favor Bush very narrowly. But I think there are a lot of Republicans worried about the same kind of thing. If the worm turns, they don't want to be seen as sore losers. So I think both sides are telegraphing their candidates, don't push this thing too hard, because it really could have impact far beyond who's the president.
Bel Air, Maryland, calling on the line for Gore supporters. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to talk about our system of voting here in Harford County. Now, Harford County, as you may know, is the home of Aberdeen Proving Ground. Our system is very, very simple. I voted, and I mistakenly, on a proposition, a constitutional proposition, amendment rather, filled in both for and against. There is a scanner that literally sucks in, inhales your ballot. Because I had voted on both sides of a proposition, the machine rejected it. One of the workers attempted to insert it again, or asked me to insert it again. I inserted it again, and again it rejected it. He then looked at the ballot and told me that I had voted on both sides of a proposition and to go and get a new ballot. Now, if this looks like a very simple mechanism, it strikes me that apparently in Palm Beach County they didn't have anything like that. Because if they did, those votes would have been rejected, and possibly, well, not possibly, there's no doubt in my mind that Gore would have won, because Palm Beach County is heavily Democratic. And to think that 3,600 people would vote for Buchanan when you consider there's a heavy Jewish population in Palm Beach County. And, of course, Pat Buchanan is known as one of our foremost anti-Semites. It just boggles the imagination.
Okay, caller, thanks very much. Sean Scully, before you respond, let me just read a little bit from a New York Times editorial this morning on this point. Democracy's rusty machinery, it says, what's become embarrassingly clear over the last few anxious days is that the world's most powerful democracy needs to figure out a better way to vote for president. The stories coming out of Florida this week are bad enough. Ballots missing or stuck together, holes punched for the wrong candidate, questionable absentee ballots. But as Florida's election officials squirm under the international spotlight, voting supervisors in other states are wincing sympathetically, many fearing that their own systems might look just as flawed under such relentless public inspection.
One of the interesting things about our voting system is it's worked so well for so long that people take it for granted. And what you'll find, especially if you cover local government, which I did for many years, is that the election office is perennially underfunded. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go, who you're talking about. They don't have enough money, and a lot of times these machines are ancient, they're antiquated, they're just not particularly good machines. And I doubt there are very many jurisdictions in the country that could withstand the kind of scrutiny that Palm Beach County is getting right now. And you better believe that Palm Beach will be looking at systems like the one the caller described, because I don't think they ever want to have this kind of scrutiny again.
Naperville, Illinois, calling on the line for Bush supporters. Good morning.
Yeah, hi, good morning. I think this is a good thing to take a look at all these discrepancies in the balloting. I would like to say here, there's just a couple of things here. It says we've got examples like New York doesn't count absentee ballots after a certain time. I mean, if there's a winner. You've got dual citizens, people that haven't lived here for 20 years that are voting. You've got Chicago threw out 120,000 ballots when they had their election. You've got illegal illegal aliens. You got the INS. I heard there was a rumor that they were sending same-day registration cards to people so they can go and vote. Okay, there's so many things here that could lead to corruption in the voting system that this is good that we take a look at the whole country, okay? And we find out where the problems are and then we work them out. I mean, it's ridiculous to sweep it under the rug and rush to judgment, whatever you want to do. Let's find out where the corruption is so we can stop it and have a fair election.
Okay, caller, thank you.
I think he's absolutely right. Don't be afraid to pay for it, though.
What are we talking about here? What kind of serious money?
Yeah, well, I mean, remember the fiasco in '97 in Florida, in Miami, where it was just a completely, essentially fraudulent vote.
This was a mayoral election?
This was the mayoral election in Miami. It was a complete fiasco, and Florida has been trying very hard to clean up their voter rolls, and the figures I've heard just for the initial cleanup of their voter rolls, just to clean off the chaff left in the voter rolls was more than $2 million. And that doesn't count the ongoing cost of maintaining the voter rolls. So it's a very, very expensive proposition, and the man is absolutely right, but don't go to your Board of Supervisors and complain about how much they're spending on elections if you want a clean election that will withstand the scrutiny.
Another quick story from the front page of your newspaper, the Washington Times. Joyce Howard Price writes this morning under the headline, "Millions of absentee votes could make Bush the one." Millions of absentee votes have yet to be counted across the nation, including more than 1 million in California alone, and those ballots could make George W. Bush the winner of the popular vote for president, election watchers say. Yesterday morning, this would have been Friday morning, Mr. Gore led Mr. Bush by 218,599 votes out of 218,599 votes out of 102 million votes cast in Tuesday's election. And our next call for Sean Scully from Shadyside, Maryland. Shadyside, Maryland on the line for Gore supporters. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. I just called because I agree essentially with the previous caller. We've heard all kinds of calls for statesmanship. And certainly if I were a candidate and I heard allegations in a state where my lead was 300 votes at the last count, that 8 or 9% of the vote in a crucial county had to be thrown away, and that there were irregularities or surprises in the tally, especially for Pat Buchanan, as a statesman, I would say I don't want to accept this presidency if this is the crucial vote until I know the details. That's really my comment.
Caller, let me ask you a question. Is there a point at which this cannot continue to go on? Do we have to have this wrapped up by a certain time?
Sure. But the time is not now. I mean, to suggest that we can't wait until the we have I think, a statutory time. We have to wait until the absentee ballots are counted. And there is time before the Electoral College meets. And I think, voters, I imagine I'd be very upset if I thought my vote didn't count.
Okay, caller, let's get a response from Sean Scott.
I agree. I mean, I think it would be unreasonable to ask either candidate to concede now. I think they have a perfect right. In fact, they probably have a duty to wait until the absentee ballots are counted. And I don't think anybody in either party disagrees with that. What I think unnerves people is this talk about we're going to go to court, we're going to get the courts to decide this, we're going to challenge every ballot to the last moment, which both sides are talking about. The Gore people started it. The Bush people, however, I think are setting themselves up to do the same thing. That's what unnerves people. So there is a point at which you've got to say, this vote is imperfect, but we're never going to get it more perfect than this, because you could potentially challenge every single state and every single county.
Westmoreland, Tennessee, a Buchanan supporter. Good morning. Westmoreland, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
You might want to turn your TV down.
My wife was a Bush supporter, but I voted for Buchanan. And I just wanted to point out, everybody keeps talking about Gore losing his home state. Now, I feel like this is a misrepresentation. Gore did carry his home state. He was born in Washington, D.C., spent most of his life growing up in Washington, D.C., came home to Smith County, not far from where I live, sort of like summer camp. He did work for the Tennessean a little while, which is sort of our version of Pravda here in the state. But basically, he did carry his home state, which was Washington, D.C. That's where the man spent most of his life.
Caller, can I just ask you a quick question? Why you voted for Pat Buchanan instead of George Bush?
Sir?
Sir, can I ask you why you voted for Pat Buchanan instead of George Bush? You said you were a Bush supporter.
I felt that Bush was just a little too uncertain on some of his issues, and I voted for Buchanan mainly because of his strong stance in Christianity and in conservative values.
Okay, thank you very much.
He brings up an interesting point about Tennessee. I mean, I think to complain about Gore being actually a resident of the District of Columbia, not Tennessee, is a little much. I mean, Gore's family is from there. He's spent a good deal of his life there. But had he won his home state, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this right at the moment. And I think, I'm not sure whether he lost touch with Tennessee or Tennessee sort of moved to the right of him, but the point is, if he'd worked harder in Tennessee or been able to pull something through in Tennessee, Florida wouldn't really be that big an issue.
Had he won the 11 electoral votes in Tennessee, he'd be over the top?
Yeah, he would have been 271 on election night. Now, with these states switching back and forth, I can't keep the math in my head right at the moment, but on election night, he would have had 271. Bush would have conceded. That would have been it.
Our next call for Sean Scully from Fort Worth, Texas, a Bush supporter. Good morning.
Good morning. My comment is that are Democrats the only people that could not punch the little whole thing out of there, or wouldn't there be Republican candidates? And if you did a hand count in 4 counties, wouldn't you then need to do all of Florida?
Thank you.
Not necessarily. Not every county. I don't believe every county in Florida uses this hand count. I mean, this punch system. So it's possible that other counties have more reliable kinds of systems. You are right. I mean, it cuts both ways, and that's one of the dangers in either side asking for a recount. You never know what's going to happen. There was an interesting story. I can't remember if it was in the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Baltimore Sun this morning, talking to Buchanan voters in Palm Beach who said, "I meant to vote for Buchanan. Absolutely. Don't disenfranchise me."
Let's just show our viewers what we're talking about here. And this is a map of Florida, and it shows the 4 counties, Volusia, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade, where the hand counts either will or might go on. Volusia will recount all the counties' ballots. Palm Beach, 3 precincts today, Saturday, and if there's a change in the vote, the entire county could be recounted by hand. Broward, 3 precincts on Monday, and if there's a change, they'll consider a hand recount of the entire county. And then Miami-Dade, officials there won't meet until Tuesday to decide whether there's going to be a hand count. Our next call for Sean Scully from Algonquin, Illinois, a Gore supporter. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm calling from Algonquin. I'm watching about this machines, this this butterfly ballot from West Miami. I mean, West Palm Beach. And that is not like it is in Chicago. Whoever pushed that up there and showed this is the way they vote in Chicago, it is not. The only one that has that is judicial, and you've got a punch on each side all the way down. We have that here. We have also the computer one that you cannot overvote. If you do, it will come back at you, and you have to look. If there is one black dot that's put on that thing with the felt pen, it will not take the vote. So
Okay.
I am a judge for election. I know what I am speaking of.
Okay, caller, thank you. Sounds like that'd be a good idea for some other precincts as well.
Absolutely.
Let's shift gears here just for a minute. We will get back to talking about the presidential race, but there's several other races. And Sean Scully, you've been covering Congress now for 3 years for the Washington Times. The margins are going to be a lot narrower, especially in the Senate. Can you put us in the picture a little bit? We've got, I think we've got here on the camera the fact that now it's 49-50, 49 Democrats, 50 Republicans, but there's one undecided race in the state of Washington. How's that going?
The last I saw, Slade Gordon, the incumbent, the Republican incumbent, was still leading, but the margin is very small. I mean, it's a few thousand votes, and so it remains. This is another case where the slightest recount, the slightest hand counting could, the absentee ballots can completely undo the election. So the Republicans are going into this, they know they're going to have control of the Senate next year. They don't know, however, if it's going to be a 50-50 tie with a Vice President Cheney breaking the tie or a 51-49 margin with them in control, but it's very, very narrow.
Let me read you a little bit from a story you wrote this week, and this is again in the Washington Times. Looks like it was on page 1. Here it is. Senate Democrats yesterday demanded power sharing with Republicans, implicitly threatening to disrupt Senate business if they don't get their way. Democrats picked up at least 3 seats in the Senate Tuesday night, bringing their total to 49 of 100 seats, giving Republicans the narrowest margin of control since 1952. One other race in Washington State, we've just talked about that, it's too close to call, giving the Democrats the chance to tie the Senate for the first time since 1880. For the first time in 120 years, the power is going to be shared in the United States Senate equally between Democrats and Republicans, said Senator Robert G. Torricelli, who's a Democrat from New Jersey. Is he right?
Yes and no. I mean, the Republicans, if you talk to the Republicans, their response was, well, he shouldn't hold his breath on that, because they're still, the chairmen are going to be clearly Republicans. The majority leader, Trent Lott, is not going to just throw open the gates and let the minority leader, Tom Daschle, do whatever he likes. As a practical matter, however, the Republicans have a fairly fractured caucus, and Mr. Daschle has been very good at keeping his group together. And so if it's 49-51 or 50-50 with the vice president having to break every single tie, the Democrats are going to be able to control the agenda fairly effectively.
Now, let me just read you a few more paragraphs here on this very point. He said, Senate Minority Leader Tom Daschle, who's the Democrat from South Dakota who leads the Senate Democrats, said he expects power to be split evenly on committees, giving Democrats a shot at taking over chairmanships, which are elected by committee members themselves. Power sharing is a unique concept, Mr. Daschle said. We recognize, and I hope they recognize, that the only way that Congress will accomplish anything is through bipartisanship. It simply will not occur in any other way. Is it conceivable at all that if the Senate is split 50-50 with, say, a Republican vice president breaking the tie, for the sake of the argument, that Trent Lott would allow a Democratic chairman of any Senate committee?
Unlikely, but there's certainly the theoretical possibility, because all they need, the chairmanships are decided by the committee members. All you need is one renegade Republican lured away to change the balance of power. In fact, all you'd need really is one renegade Republican to switch the majority leader. I mean, you could really, they're going to have to keep 50 Republicans together absolutely all the time.
Now, what does this mean for any legislation coming out of the Senate over the next couple of years?
Well, it depends. If either side decides to play hardball, or even a significant minority of either party plays hardball, it means virtually nothing's going to get done. If either side decides to cooperate, or both sides decide to cooperate, you could see some real legislation coming out. I think it's going to be quite narrow. You talk to the senators, and there are areas, obviously, where they can agree. I mean, you talk about prescription drugs and Medicare. Well, both presidential candidates talked about that. There's an area where they can both sit down and say, all right, if we really meant our rhetoric, we're going to do something. What it's going to look like, who knows?
Let me just switch quickly here to the House, because the House is in a slightly better position for the Republicans. Right now, let's see, according to the latest information from CNN's website, we have the old lineup was 210 Democrats, 223 Republicans, and 2 independents, and I gather they're split basically.
Yeah.
Each one of those votes with Republicans, one with Democrats. Now it's 211 Democrats and 220 Republicans and 2 independents. That's a little bit narrower. What does this mean in practical terms for the House?
Probably not a great deal, really. I mean, the margin was so close this last year. All they had to do was lose, I think it was, well, 5 or 6 on any given piece of legislation, that the Democrats could stymie Republican legislation. It just makes it a little bit easier for the Democrats to lure away a couple of liberal or moderate Republicans. It's going to be a 3-ring circus this year, just like it was last year. Dennis Hastert did a pretty good job, did, I think, about as good a job as you can with essentially a dead split House. I suppose he's probably going to be able to do about as much or as little as he did last year.
So let me put you on the spot. If you had to predict, scale of 1 to 10, big legislation, tax cuts, for instance, HMO, patients' rights bill, for instance, or you just talked about prescription drugs, scale of 1 to 10, what's the likelihood of seeing this in the next couple of years?
I think all of those will happen. What the details in them, I wouldn't even hazard a guess. I mean, you're going to have a piece of legislation about prescription drugs or about the Patient's Bill of Rights, but don't count on what's going to be in it.
And then just one more thing here. What happens to a Republican who's lured across the lines to join with the Democrats on a key issue?
Well, given the narrowness of the majority, it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans to punish them. I mean, if they had a large majority, they could punish them with taking away their committee assignments or something. But let's say a guy crosses the line, votes with the Democrats. If the Speaker comes to him and says, you lose your prime committee seat, what's he going to do? He switches parties. I mean, that's a very real possibility, and there's a significant number of Democrats or Republicans who I think would be ideologically comfortable in the Democratic Party, and there are a few Democrats comfortable in the Republican Party. I don't think either side is going to really be able to enforce ironclad discipline.
What is it, just one more thing, because you brought that up, the track record of people who switch parties? I think in the last Congress there was a Republican in New York who switched to the Democratic Party.
Michael Forbes.
And didn't he lose overwhelmingly when he ran for re-election?
He lost in his primary. The Democrats, I mean, that's one of the dangers with a party switcher is you lose in your own primary. And then he ran as an independent and got completely whomped. He got 3%. However, I mean, party switchers historically have not done all that badly. A good number of the Republican majority now in the House and Senate started their careers as Democrats. So it is possible.
Let's go back to our phones. Ardsley, New York, calling on the Gore supporter line. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thank you.
I'm calling because I voted for Gore in New York, and my uncle, who's 80 years old, lives in Palm Beach. And I called to see how he was feeling, and he said he went to vote, and he was one of those people that pulled both or 2 different lines, Buchanan and Gore. And I said, well, that's your vote. You know, even though I'm a Gore supporter, I always think that people get 1 ballot. And he said, no, you're wrong. In Florida, it's the law that if you make a mistake, since it's a paper ballot, you're allowed to come out and ask for another ballot. And I had never heard of such a thing. I said, are you sure, Uncle Irv? He said, yes, I'm absolutely sure, except when I came out to ask for another ballot, they wouldn't give it to me. And then my neighbor came out, and they asked for one, and they wouldn't give it to them either. And what concerned me the most about this is when I was listening to other radio stations for the last 2 days, is that people are saying, well, why should we do a recount? People made a mistake. But if it's Florida law that if people come out and they immediately say that they made a mistake, can I please have a new ballot, and then they're denied that privilege, then I want to know what the truth is. And if that is correct, then I will accept whatever president is chosen and elected by the people, provided that the votes are all in the absentees and the corrections in Palm Beach. And I think and most of America could live with that.
Okay, caller, thanks. Any idea of how widespread that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I don't know the details of Florida law. I know, generally speaking, if the courts presume that that you have the ability to understand the ballot and the ability to read it, the ability to read the instructions, and their take generally is, if you made a mistake, tough. I don't know the details of Florida law on that. The interesting thing is more people have complained about voting for Pat Buchanan accidentally than voted for Pat Buchanan in Palm Beach. So you've got to wonder how many people actually know that their ballot was invalidated or actually know that they pulled the lever or just think they did.
Our next call for Sean Scully from Los Angeles, calling on the Bush supporter line. Good morning. Los Angeles?
Yes.
Go right ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, this is Tame. I have to say I'm probably going to sue CNN and voter news services for emotional distress. I cannot tell you what me and Molly Pitcher and a lot of other people went through at Free Republic on election night. That was absolutely cruel what happened to us that night. First of all, calling Florida for Gore knocked the wind out of my sails. And then the elation I felt when the CNN called Bush the winner of the election, I haven't felt that way except for one single moment in high school athletics. And that was even different. But listen, I have something about this voter thing here with these ballots in Florida. I think, and maybe this gentleman from Washington Times can help me out on this. I think that if there was a study done of all the different places around this country, I think the Republicans need to do this, where similar things have happened. I don't know if people realize how many times people make mistakes with ballots all the time to the same tune, the same number, as happened over there in Palm Beach, okay? And if you're too stupid to be able to see the little hole and it's got a little arrow next to it, tells you where to vote, where to push the hole down, okay? I looked at the ballot, all right? It's really not that hard, and if you're that stupid that you can't figure it out, maybe you're too stupid to be determining the future of our presidency here.
Okay, caller, thanks.
Well, I think stupid is perhaps too strong a word, but I mean, people can get confused. You're right, though. I mean, people make mistakes all the time. It happens continuously in elections, and really, as I've said earlier, no, I don't think there's any precinct in the country that could withstand the kind of unbelievable scrutiny that that Palm Beach and some of the others are getting.
Lawton, Oklahoma, line for Bush supporters. You're next. Good morning. Lawton, Oklahoma, are you there?
Yes.
Go right ahead. You're on the air.
I want to ask, what is the statistical margin of error in when you have this many votes? What would be considered the statistical margin of error? Like the polls are always saying, well, this is within the 1 or 2 percentage margin of error, and I'm just wondering if you just took these numbers, put them in statistically, what would be considered the margin of error, and where are we in relationship to that?
Okay. There's a tough technical question for you.
Fascinating question. I don't know if there's an answer to that.
Can you have a statistical margin of error when we're not talking about a poll and we're talking about an actual...
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you probably can. Probably statisticians could play with it, but as a practical matter, you can't apply it to the election.
Delray Beach, Florida, calling on the line for Gore supporters. Good morning.
Good morning.
Go right ahead.
Oh, yes. I have felt that the way that we elect our president with the Electoral College is not fair. That's an archaic way that was first probably started when our forefathers made the Constitution for I don't know whatever reasons. However, today I think the people of the country should have their vote, and it should be counted as a popular vote and not the Electoral College. Although I say most people are very honest, I think perhaps sometimes they can make a mistake at the Electoral College and vote whoever they want. And therefore I feel that a law should be introduced to do away with the Electoral College.
Okay, caller, thank you very much, and I'm glad you raised that point because in about half an hour we're going to be talking with 2 electors from the Electoral College discussing that very issue, among other things, finding out how the Electoral College works. Before I ask Sean Scully to respond, let me just read a quick piece here from the Washington Times this morning on page A3. Hillary urges abolition of the Electoral College. Senator-elect Hillary Rodham Clinton yesterday called for the elimination of the Electoral College, beginning a victory tour of upstate New York. The First Lady said she'd support legislation for a constitutional amendment that would provide for the direct election of the president. We are a very different country than we were 200 years ago, Mrs. Clinton said. I believe strongly that in a democracy we should respect the will of the people, and to me that means it's time to do away with the Electoral College and move to the popular election of our president.
A couple of points on that. Just from a personal point of view, I'm a big fan of the Electoral College because it protects the voice of small states. I mean, people have pointed out that nobody would ever visit West Virginia during an election ever again in history if it was simply a popular vote. People would spend all their time in New York City and Los Angeles, and that would be the end of the presidential campaign. That leads into the fact that people are going to introduce this legislation. I think it's dead, absolutely, in the Senate before it's even introduced, because the small state senators simply aren't going to put up with it. I mean, Tom Daschle made the point that South Dakota is a very small state, and they get little enough attention and little enough influence as it is, and they're simply not going to put up with having the Electoral College abolished any more than they have put up with having the Senate abolished.
Our next call from Tehran, Iran, an international caller. Good morning.
Hi.
Caller, go right ahead.
Okay. I'm calling from Tehran. I live in Denver, Colorado, but because my father-in-law was sick, I had to come overseas for the funeral and stuff. So I was just going to say that Al Gore is making a fool of the country like Bill Clinton did for the past about a year, because now everyone, I mean, I watch this stuff on the satellite dish and everything, and everyone's talking about how the United States, they can't even pick a president for their country and stuff. And if you, I have to agree with that other guy who called, not that you're stupid, but if you can't punch a hole in a ballot, then you really shouldn't be voting, I think.
Caller, can I just ask you, you can get C-SPAN in Tehran?
Yeah. Well, it's on satellite dish.
This is not something that everybody in Tehran has, satellite dish?
No, it's not.
But the government doesn't try to interfere, and there's no prohibition, and it's perfectly okay to get C-SPAN and CNN and so on and so forth?
Well, we don't get CNN and stuff, but C-SPAN and MSNBC and stuff, we get those.
I'm delighted to hear it. Thank you very much for calling in this morning.
You're an international star, George. It's amazing.
It's huge.
That could be. The funny thing is, this is sort of an embarrassment around the world. People are laughing at us, frankly. I mean, I did a piece for British television a day or so ago. They're extremely amused. I think they'll get over it. I mean, I think they're just sort of tweaking the powerful. I don't think it's going to have any long-term impact.
Our next call for Sean Scully from the Washington Times, Reno, Nevada, calling on the line for Bush supporters. Good morning.
Yeah, I guess my big question is, no one seems to be talking about the fact that all these ballots were sent out to these people in all over the United States, at least 2 weeks before the election. If these people had any question, why in the world were they not calling their registrar of voters and asking to please clarify the way this ballot was set up?
I mean, that's the point that the Florida officials are making, is that everybody knew this ballot. They've seen this sort of ballot before. It was designed, I believe, by a Democratic election official, and there wasn't any question before. The thing is, though, when you get into the ballot box, and I know from having done it, when you get into the ballot box, it's very different than looking at the ballot, because you suddenly have to figure out how the little lever fits and figure out which side of the card you got to vote on and all of that sort of stuff. So I could see people getting confused. I mean, the ballot to me looks clear, but when you're in the voting booth, it's a very different thing, and working with the machine, it's a very different creature.
Yet another story this morning from Sean Scully's newspaper, The Washington Times, and this is about the person who designed the ballot, Teresa Lepore, who's a Palm Beach County election supervisor. And let me just read you a few paragraphs. The woman who designed the ballot that has caused Florida's presidential election storm is devastated by the controversy, acquaintances and county officials say. Teresa Lepore, the Palm Beach County election supervisor, is accused of designing a flawed butterfly ballot and disenfranchising thousands of voters in Palm Beach County. She's been named in at least 2 lawsuits, and noisy protesters have demonstrated outside her office claiming the ballot was illegal and demanding a new election. By all accounts, though, she's a conscientious, dedicated career employee with a spotless record. She's worked for the elections office since she was 16 years old, rising from secretary and ultimately becoming the county's top elections official 4 years ago. And here's a quote from somebody who's actually suing her. He says, Teresa Lepore is a wonderful, gracious, honest woman. Teresa Lepore in no way did anything willfully to harm anyone ever, said Andre Fledel, a Palm Beach County voter who knows Ms. Lepore and is suing her, seeking a new election. The irony of the situation is that Ms. Lepore designed the 2-page ballot so it would accommodate larger print and make it easier for senior citizens to read. A 1-column ballot would have required smaller print. Our next call for Sean Scully from Concord, Vermont, calling on the line for Gore supporters. Good morning.
Good morning. I just wanted to say that the woman who couldn't understand why the confusion was only between Gore and Buchanan, to me it was very clear that you punched the number 1 hole was for Bush, and the other 2 holes were Buchanan and Gore. And also, if Florida law reads that the check mark or the punch mark has to be to the right of the candidate's name, then to me that should be followed through.
Okay, caller, thank you. Our next call for Sean Scully from Watertown, New York, calling on the line for Bush supporters. Good morning.
Yeah, hi, good morning there, gentlemen. Two questions real quick. I'm not quite sure what the people are meaning. We see a lot of things on the national news that people are saying their rights have been taken away, their vote has been taken away. I'm under the impression that they are allowed to go in and vote, and I'm under the impression that they cast their vote, whether it was right or wrong or however it was cast. So what I'm trying to understand is, why is the Democrats, maybe not so much the Democrats, but people in general, trying to say that the vote has been taken away? They cast their vote. If they cast it wrong, if there was something where they were not allowed to re-vote, well, then I understand. But if they walked outside that booth and left that place, then 3 days later they come up with some kind of, well, I should have been able to vote the way I wanted to vote. In my opinion, once they left, and if they were not allowed to re-vote if they made a mistake, then what's the big deal?
Okay, caller, thanks. Let's get a response.
That's one of the things that the Gore people are going to have to face. I mean, as a practical matter, what do you do about this? I mean, you could have a revote, but then again, remember the presidential election is on one day. It's a national election, and you're never ever going to be able to recreate the thinking and the conditions from that day. So the Gore people have a very high threshold to get over, I think, to argue for a new vote for exactly the reason you're talking about.
Do you happen to know if there's any precedent for a revote in a county or a state? Or?
I have heard of some revotes on smaller elections. I don't know. I don't believe there is on the presidential. I may be wrong, but I have not heard of any.
Maybe somebody out there in our vast audience knows that and can call in and tell us. Our next call from Greenville, South Carolina, calling on the line for Gore supporters. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing? I have just a couple things. One, all of a sudden they're starting to say that the Democrats were going out giving people cigarettes and stuff like that to go vote for Gore. And also I wanted to say that I agree with one of the Bush callers that called in and said that they wanted to sue CNN or whatever for the emotional distress. Yes, I was very emotionally distressed when they took it away from Gore, when they took Florida away from Gore. I looked at the ballot on the television, and yes, the arrows are pointing, but you have people that have never voted before in their life, and for them to go in the box and be nervous or whatever, and you can't. They're saying that the Democrats are being stupid, or if they didn't read it, why should they be in the voting box or whatever. A lot of people came out for the very first time. Maybe it was said to them. Maybe, and one caller said, well, why didn't they call somebody and ask them to explain it? If this is their first time voting, who are they going to call? You understand what I'm saying? I don't agree with some of that stuff. And then they say that Gore has a vote fixed. Well, Bush's brother is the senator of Florida. There's a whole lot of things going on wrong in Florida, so I don't understand why they're trying to say that it's Gore that's making this go all wrong. If the voters feel like if they felt unjust, then make it just.
Okay, caller, thank you. Thank you very much.
She's right. I mean, it isn't. I mean, this isn't Gore's fault, and I don't think anybody can blame him for challenging. I mean, he's got every right to do it because it is very close. In fact, Florida law called for the recount. I think what people are worried about is sort of inflammatory rhetoric. Both sides are guilty of it. I think the Gore people probably started it, but I mean, that's a name-calling game. Both sides are engaged in it, and I think both sides are very concerned about it.
Sean Scully is a native of Northern Virginia. Where'd you grow up?
Alexandria.
Right across the river here. And he's a graduate of the University of Virginia. He covered state and local governments for the Washington Times and other newspapers in Maryland and Virginia, and been covering the Congress and national politics for the Washington Times since 1998. You told me earlier your next stop tomorrow, Austin?
Austin, Texas. We're in campaign mode till this thing sorts out, so I may sue CNN too.
Our next call for Sean Scully from Spring, Texas, calling on the line for Bush supporters. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're on the air. Go right ahead.
Oh, what I'd like to know is everyone is concerned about how the presidential candidates were lined up with the arrows. Is this all that was on the Florida ballot? Or what about the senators, local people? If one section is misaligned, I would assume that the rest of the pages were also. Anyone check into this? Why aren't they complaining about the others on the ballot?
Okay, thanks, caller.
It's not a bad question. I haven't heard anybody talk about it.
We're going to go now. We're going to shift gears just for a second here and talk about something that we haven't brought up this morning yet, and that is ballot initiatives online. We've got coming in from outside Dane Waters on the telephone, and we'll bring him up right now. Dane Waters, good morning.
Good morning.
And Dane Waters, you're the president of the Initiative and Referendum Institute. And just briefly, can you tell our viewers and our listeners what that is?
Yes, the Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan educational research organization. We are dedicated to the study of the initiative and referendum process, or what we commonly refer to as ballot measures.
You know, I hardly know where to start since there were 204 ballot measures of various kinds all over the country on Tuesday. But can you give us your sense of what the... Well, first let me ask you this. In fact, in your... and I want to ask you what you thought the most important ones were. But, you know, in your analysis of what happened on Tuesday, you said this: voters were cautious. Almost every measure that could be labeled far-reaching was voted down.
That's exactly right. I mean, when the voters went to the ballot box on these 204 measures, they did not pass any far-reaching measures. I mean, the environmental growth measures that were on the ballot in Arizona and Colorado were defeated. School choice measures across the country were defeated. The only thing that was really far-reaching, some people may categorize, are the ban on same-sex marriage initiatives that passed in Nebraska and Nevada. But outside of those, the voters were very cautious, very moderate, and were just uncertain about many of these issues.
And let me ask you this. I got a story here from the Washington Post from Thursday, and it talks about some of these initiatives. And let me see what you think of this. It says voters, this is a story out of Los Angeles by William Booth and Renee Sanchez. It says voters in the nation's most populous state approved a radical shift in the war on drugs, saying drug abusers should be placed in treatment programs instead of being sent to prison. California's Proposition 36 will bar state courts from sentencing those convicted of simple drug possession to prison, and instead will route abusers of even the hardest drugs, such as heroin and cocaine, into mandatory treatment. The measure could keep as many as 37,000 drug users a year out of jail. And the story goes on to say this, and this is what I want to get your reaction to. Whether the rest of the nation follows California's lead in social policy is unknown, but what is clear is that a tough-on-crime state with the largest per capita prison population in the world has reached a turning point in its approach to illegal drugs.
Well, my response to that, if you look at the drug policy reform movement, which is funded primarily by George Soros and Peter Lewis and Gene Sperling, I mean, they had 6 measures on the ballot this election cycle, including Proposition 36 in California. They went 5 of 6. They were the big winners, there's no doubt. This is the same group that pushed medical marijuana in 1996 and 1998. They're going across the country. And what happened with Prop 36 and the other 4 measures that passed, there is no doubt that they will be on future ballots. Their ultimate goal, from talking to people on both sides, is to push Congress to act to deal with these the drug war in this country.
Can you tell us about some of the other things that did pass? I gather there was, for instance, a tax rollback of some kind in Washington, if I'm right.
Yeah, you know, as far as the tax movement is concerned, they had some wins and losses. I mean, there was in Washington State, there was a tax rollback that basically rolled back all taxes passed since 1999 and put a limitation on property taxes there. Actually, there's already been a lawsuit filed against that, claiming it violates the state's single subject rule for initiatives. Another big win for the tax movement was a measure in Massachusetts that was sponsored by Governor Cellucci there that cut the state income tax from 5.95% to 5%. So they had some big wins. Inheritance taxes, abolishing the inheritance tax, won overwhelmingly in South Dakota and Montana. Almost 80% of the people in those states said they wanted to do away with the inheritance tax. And the tax reform movement hopes that will, kind of send a message to Congress, say, hey, let's get rid of this death tax.
We're not going to have nearly enough time to go through all the initiatives or even all the interesting initiatives here that were voted on Tuesday, but on your website there's a very good guide to that, and we're going to bring it up on the screen right now. And Dane Waters, could you just tell us what the URL is for that, or the web address?
Yeah, it's www.ballotwatch, one word, ballotwatch.org. If you go there on the front screen, you'll see election reviews, election analysis, and you can go there and you can put in your state, and up will come a listing of what passed and what failed. Today we'll actually be put in the actual vote totals, and it will be updated. But you can go there and find out everything that you want to know about these measures that were on the ballot.
And one thing about gun control, can you give us put us in the picture in terms of what the gun control initiatives were?
Yeah, both in Colorado and Oregon, there were measures that would close the loophole on guns sold at gun shows. They passed overwhelmingly in both states, but basically it closes that loophole. And the gun control movement now kind of sees that the NRA in their mind is invincible. So this is the type of measure that you're going to see on the ballot in other states in the near future.
All right, and one other thing, the assisted suicide in Maine.
Yeah, that was kind of a setback for that movement. They had the big victories in Oregon, and then they lost in '98 in Michigan, and they had expected to win this one in Maine, and it failed narrowly. I don't think it's the end of that movement at all. They have they have a very in their minds a very moderate approach to this issue, and they're going to try it again in other states.
If you had to say, based on what happened on Tuesday, where this is going in the next election cycle, what do you gather from what happened on Tuesday?
Well, I think that sends a clear message that a lot of the, as I said, the far-reaching measures, the voters probably will not support those in the future. It's easy to demagogue far-reaching measures, whether it's school choice or environmental reform, and voters typically take the cautious route and vote no. But you're going to see drug policy reform on the ballot in the future. I think health care reform, even though it failed in Massachusetts, it did force the legislature to pass a watered-down version, so you're going to see more health care reform, more animal protection measures across the country. I don't think you're going to see school choice making its way to the ballot box anytime soon. But public funding of education did very well, and I have a feeling that the proponents who want more money for public education will be back to the ballot box.
Dane Waters of the Initiative and Referendum Institute, thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And Sean Scully, let me ask you, based on what you've been hearing here, is any of this stuff going to resonate in Congress, gun control?
Well, the gun control measure really is covering something that is on the table in Congress, and I'm sure we'll be back. Both sides, even the NRA, agree that if you're going to have background checks at all, you should have them at gun shows. Again, it's a detail question. I mean, the Democrats have pushed a very broad definition of what a gun show is. The Republicans are narrower, but I think both sides agree that some kind of change is necessary, and both presidential candidates have said it.
You're coming back to cover Congress in January?
I hope so.
What's the first issue that's going to be on there, the first big issue that you think you're going to be covering?
It depends who the president is. Gore has promised to put campaign finance up. Bush has promised to put the tax cuts and a number of other kind of his programs up. I think we just got to wait to see how the election comes out.
Flushing, Michigan, calling on the line for Bush supporters for Sean Scully. Good morning.
Yes, sir. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Okay. My name is Julius Smith, and I live in Flushing Township near Flint, Michigan. And I have something I think that's quite important if you would give me the opportunity to get it all out. In all of this discussion about the franchise and people being denied the franchise to vote, have you really given serious thought to the fact that many people who vote are not really exercising the franchise, but they're exercising a mob kind of a principle that says to particularly us, and I'm a African American as they call us, we are voting in herds. The Democratic Party has converged on our churches and the schools, including Jesse Jackson, and they have created a herd of voters for the Democratic Party. They come in and say that they're coming in to just encourage voter registration and voting, and they use that to preach the Democratic Party policy and doctrine. So in effect, what we're looking at is people being elected by herds of people who have become kind of a zombie. They don't think, they just are told to go in and pull one lever, which is straight Democratic, And in fact, Gore, at a church that I was thrown out of just this last week, I was thrown off the parking lot because I had Bush signs on my truck.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's get a response.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, the black vote has been predominantly Democratic and still is, but what's interesting is if you look around the country, that's fragmenting. Even in Florida, I mean, there was a huge controversy between black Democrats and the white Democratic leadership down there a couple of years ago that really threatened to split that vote apart. Democrats are very worried about that. I think the black vote is becoming much more diverse and will continue to become much more diverse. What he's talking about, though, more broadly, sort of people voting in mass, has always been true, and that's one of the reasons for the Electoral College. The Founding Fathers are very suspicious of people just sort of popular opinion going one way or the other.
Another call from Florida, this one from Atlantic Beach, calling on the line for Gore supporters. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Yes, I live in Duval County, and our headlines today says Duval tosses 22,000 votes out, unusually high rate to draw a closer look. Further in the article, it also states that 5,000 votes were thrown out because they didn't push the punch card hard enough. How many more of this has happened in the state of Florida? It's just irregulars, time after time.
Caller, let me ask you this. Did you have any difficulty voting or interpreting the ballot in Duval County?
Kind of confusing. I could see how elderly people would have problems with it, with pushing it in and understanding how it was laid out. And the other thing, to the man that said voters were stupid, voting is a right, and it's not an intelligence test. We all have a right to vote. We all have a right to our opinions, and it shouldn't become personal. All parties should be worried when there's this much irregularity happening in our votings. This looks like Serbia.
Thanks very much, caller. Our next call from Blanche, Tennessee, calling on the line for Bush supporters. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd love to say something about, the other day when Clinton went in to vote, he was up there talking about and told everybody to be sure to vote Democrat. And then Gore was in a school making a speech while there was voting going on. I went to vote here in Tennessee, and I had a Bush Cheney sticker on my car, and they had me to move my car way out of the area before they'd let me vote. And I just think we have nothing. The Democrat Party does anything they want to in reference to separation of state and church with the black people, and they get away with it. It just ain't fair.
Caller, can I ask you why they told you had to move your car?
Because I was within so many feet of a voting place, and it was a sticker on my car.
Okay, thank you, caller.
There usually is a perimeter around. There is a perimeter around ballot polling places, and I don't know particularly what Gore or Clinton did, but I've never seen a candidate violate that. They always have their little news conferences after they vote outside that perimeter.
And that means no electioneering, I guess, within
right,
that perimeter?
No, yeah, exactly. All you can have is poll watchers and voters in that perimeter, and outside of that, that's why you see around polling places people standing around a fence or something, because they're right outside the perimeter and they can hand out their literature and that sort of thing.
Now, if a voter walks into a polling place with a Bush or a Gore button on?
I don't know. I don't think they're supposed to do that, but I've never really watched to see how that works.
In just a few minutes, we'll be talking with two electors, one from Maryland, one from Virginia, explaining to us how the Electoral College works. We have one more call for Sean Scully of the Washington Times, this from Rayville, Louisiana, calling on the line for Gore supporters. Good morning. Rayville, you there?
Yes.
Go right ahead. You're on the air.
Yes. I'd like to say these people that keep talking about the elderly and calling them stupid and not being able to read and do this and do that, but for the grace of God, some of these people could be that same age, and there's going to come a time when they do reach this age that they might be in the same situation. And I'd also like to say to the Christians of this country, you need to take a look at this. The hand of God is on the wall. Thank you.